Hello and welcome to the Financial Historian. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, America's entry into World War I. The story you learned in school is about noble ideals, German aggression, and making the world safe for democracy. But what if the real story is about money, debt, and a decision made not on the battlefield, but on the balance sheets of Wall Street? Before a single American soldier set foot in Europe, billions of dollars were already flowing across the Atlantic. By the time the U.S. declared war, its financial fate was inextricably tied to an Allied victory. The Allies weren't just fighting Germany, they were fighting to stay solvent. And America's most powerful banks were too deeply invested to let them lose. When the guns of August 1914 erupted across Europe, the United States was officially neutral. President Woodrow Wilson declared America would be impartial in thought as well as in action. But neutrality is a luxury, and American business interests were anything but impartial. With Britain's Royal Navy blockading Germany, global trade routes were redrawn overnight. For Wall Street, that chaos looked like opportunity. European nations were desperate for everything: steel, grain, munitions, oil. And the only major neutral economy that could provide it was the United States. By 1915, American factories were running on overtime, humming not for peace, but for war. At the center of this financial whirlwind stood one man, J.P. Morgan Jr. His father, the legendary financier, had died just a year before the war, leaving him an empire. Morgan Jr. wasted no time positioning his firm as the financial lifeline for the Allied cause. Britain appointed J.P. Morgan & Co. as its official purchasing agent in the U.S., and France soon followed. Morgan's firm coordinated billions of dollars in orders for everything from locomotives to bullets, taking a commission on every single transaction. In theory, America remained neutral. In practice, its economy was becoming an extension of the Allied war machine. But a huge problem was brewing. The Allies were running out of money. By late 1915, Britain's gold reserves were nearly gone. They had literally shipped tons of bullion across the Atlantic to pay for weapons. There are photos from the time showing armed guards escorting gold bars through New York Harbor, the treasure of an empire being spent to keep its armies in the field. When the gold ran out, Morgan offered credit. In 1915, he organized a massive $500 million loan, the largest in history at that point, backed by a syndicate of Wall Street banks. Over the next 2 years, those loans ballooned to more than $2 billion. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. federal budget at the time was barely $1 billion. America's private bankers had essentially taken ownership of the Allied war effort. This created a terrifying risk. If Britain and France lost the war, those massive debts would be wiped out. The resulting financial catastrophe would destroy Wall Street and drag the entire U.S. economy down with it. President Wilson knew it. His Treasury Secretary knew it. Every economist in Washington could see the writing on the wall. Neutrality was no longer economically possible. The United States had gambled its financial future on an Allied victory. To the American public, however, it was still Europe's war. The slogan that got Wilson re-elected in 1916 was, "He kept us out of war." But behind the scenes, the money told a very different story. By the end of 1916, Allied credit lines were collapsing. The British were desperate, but Congress was getting nervous, questioning whether private banks were dragging the country toward war. So Morgan got creative, hiding loans inside trade contracts and using intermediaries to disguise the flow of funds. The arrangement worked until it didn't. In early 1917, Britain delivered an ultimatum: without fresh credit, it would default. A British default wouldn't just ruin their treasury, it would annihilate Wall Street. The exposure was massive. Morgan, National City Bank, and a dozen other institutions stood to lose everything. When Morgan's representatives met with Treasury officials, their message was stark: if Britain falls, we fall. And then, as if on cue, the world provided the perfect pretext. On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat had torpedoed the Lusitania, a British passenger ship. Nearly 1,200 people died, including 128 Americans. The press exploded with outrage. Germany insisted the ship was carrying munitions. Britain denied it. Decades later, divers confirmed that Germany was right. The Lusitania's hold was packed with ammunition. But in the moment, the truth didn't matter. Public opinion turned sharply against Germany. Still, Wilson held back. The economy was booming, the stock market was soaring, and banks were making a fortune. There was no reason to risk it all, unless the risk of not fighting became even greater. That moment arrived in early 1917. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, directly threatening American shipping. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German proposal inviting Mexico to join the war against the U.S. in exchange for Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was the perfect storm, morally and politically. Public anger boiled over. In April 1917, President Wilson stood before Congress and asked for a declaration of war. His words were noble. The world must be made safe for democracy. But behind the soaring rhetoric was a cold, hard truth. The world had to be made safe for American credit. Within weeks, the U.S. government performed a feat of financial magic. It transformed the private loans of Wall Street into national debt. The famous Liberty Bond campaigns urged citizens to support the troops by buying government bonds. In reality, those bonds were financing the very same obligations Morgan's banks had created, now guaranteed by American taxpayers instead of private bankers. The risk was nationalized. Wall Street had saved itself and wrapped the bailout in patriotism. The war economy exploded. America's GDP doubled. And when the dust settled in 1918, the United States had transformed. It was no longer a debtor nation. It was the world's largest creditor. The old European empires were drowning in debt owed to America. For the first time, the center of global finance shifted from London to New York. The pattern established here would define the 20th century. War financed by debt converted into influence, and influence used to build an empire. It's easy to dismiss this as a conspiracy theory, that America went to war just to save its bankers. But the reality is far more subtle. It wasn't a secret cabal in a smoky room. It was the logical outcome of a system where finance and national interest had become one and the same. Once money defines the system, morality becomes the language of justification. Wilson could speak sincerely about democracy while his treasury was quietly absorbing private debt. It's how empires explain their balance sheets. So, did America enter World War I to save democracy or to save its bankers? The answer is probably both. But history leaves one truth written clearly in its ledgers. The war made America rich. It made Wall Street global. It transformed private capital into public power and debt into destiny. The United States didn't conquer Europe. It inherited it, one balance sheet at a time. If this gave you a new perspective on history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the bell. History has the answers, and here we show you where to find them. Thanks for watching.